Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
And is the screen
Yes, yes, yes.
visible?
Even screen is visible, sir.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So would like to welcome everybody to this budget presentation of Nirmal Bang Group. I'm part of the institutional equities team, and I head the research outfit here. So I think we'll be followed by uh, presentations by other teams of Nirmal Bang. I think immediately after us will be the retail research team. It's going to present. So obviously it's going to be a long day. So I will get into it right away. So I have about 4 slides. So obviously there was a quite a bit of hype around the budget with the FM starting saying that starting out saying that this could be the budget of the century and things of those sort. I won't call it budget of the century, but definitely it's a very important budget, so to speak, in the context of the what we've seen globally. So we've had a pandemic play out in 2020, which has resulted in global GDP and Indian GDP kind of contracting quite significantly. Probably uh, we've not seen something like this for decades together. So we saw a steep market correction early part of 2020, and then an equally strong, or probably even stronger, rebound. So from the March 20 bottom, we're probably up about 90% on the Nifty, driven by significant monetary easing by almost all central banks. And obviously, there's been also fiscal stimulus provided by various governments. And these been of various degrees, so to speak, depending on the capacity of each country. So today's market move, we saw a very strong market up move. Obviously, we believe that that's been driven by the fiscal deficit number. In our opinion, the 6.8% number indicates that the government is very keen on supporting growth. So if you had looked at uh, the just one second. So we've had a strong rally because markets were expecting anywhere between 5.5% kind of fiscal deficit number. Our economist was expecting a higher number of 6.4%. Actually, it's come in higher at 6.8%, which means that the government is not trying to propel growth using extra spending. That is very heartening in one sense, and even the trajectory for fiscal consolidation that they're talking about is, in my opinion, slightly, I would say, a very gentle one, going up to 4.5% by FY26. That's like a 5-year time frame for us to consolidate to that level. Uh, the market was driven up largely, in my opinion, by Bank Nifty. So why did Bank Nifty do so well? My take is that obviously growth. So growth, there is a lot of difference in opinion regarding how much the growth is going to look like. Our own economists thinks that that's probably going to be like 7% next year. And we're talking real GDP growth here. There are others on the street who are talking about double digit and even slightly higher numbers, maybe even going into closer to mid-teens. The number that the government has put out is a nominal GDP number of 14.5% nominal GDP. Now, depending on what inflation you want to take, it could be either 9 or 10%. So I suspect that the government is taking a 10% real GDP number to work with. And that I think is positive from a bank's perspective because the struggle on the NPA side will be a little lesser if we have strong GDP growth kind of coming through. Second is, I would say there are a whole lot of other things that have happened on the financial side. So the setting up of a development financial institution to fund infrastructure, in my opinion, is a very critical one. So we've had a development financial institutions in the past in the form of ICICI and IDBI and IFCI and all that, and those kind of turned into retail banks. I think we'll probably have a new one being set up, which will probably take on some of the risks that the banking system has been taking on in terms of funding infrastructure, and a lot of these have gone bad. So I would say that is good for the other part of the banking system, which is not taking on those risks. I think the biggest takeaway for me was I would say the political capital that the current government is expending in terms of going in for a PSU privatization. I don't think any other government in the last 20 years has shown this much of boldness in terms of attempting to do a PSU bank privatization. So they're trying to do that with two PSU banks. I don't know how much traction they're going to get, but I think this would require legislative action, in my opinion. So obviously they're going to come up against opposition in the parliament. Then there's been a lot of discussion around bad bank for many years now. I think they're trying to test waters there. And lastly, on FDI, there is a discussion around insurance being up from 14 to 74%. So these, I would say, are the key things that probably drove the bank nifty up. So why am I saying that while it may probably live up to this budget in 100 years, so to speak, but should definitely be a good budget, is the math is fairly credible. Nominal GDP growth of 14.5% and tax revenues, net tax revenue to center growing by just about 14.5%, 15%. I think that's a pretty credible number. I wouldn't be surprised if the number comes in much higher than that. I'm talking tax revenues here. If 14.5% nominal GDP growth is delivered, I would suspect it could be a much higher tax revenue number coming through. So to that extent, I would say even that 6.8% fiscal deficit will probably be, could turn out to be lower. The other is, I think this budget is supporting the very strong earnings growth expectations the market has got. So if you look at Nifty earnings expectations, that somewhere in the 35 to 40% region in terms of growth next year, FY22. A lot of it is driven by financials. A lot of it is driven by sectors which have not participated in earnings growth thus far. So there's a broadening of earnings growth that one is seeing in the market. I think the budget is going to probably support some of that. The other very interesting thing that's happened, in my opinion, has been the fiscal deficit for FY21 is coming at 9.5% versus everybody was expecting somewhere in the region of 7.5%, 8% or thereabouts, which means, in my opinion, that the government is actually front loading some of the spending. So they continue to spend even in 4Q. And I would say that is good in terms of keeping up the tempo of the recovery. So I think they're going to borrow some extra amount, is what the finance minister indicated. So I think that is positive. I think the divestment number, in my opinion, at 1.75 trillion looks fairly achievable, considering that there's been a lot of groundwork done already on BPCL, Air India, Concor, potential IPO of LIC. So those, I think, are fairly possible. And I discussed this PSU bank privatization part, which I think is this government is taking on extra risks, so to speak. We've never seen any other government in the past do that. Maybe it is because it's got the legislative wherewithal, especially in the Lok Sabha. Rajya Sabha, probably they need to cobble up the numbers there. Of course, there's been this discussion around, PLI, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So there's been a lot of money spent on that, a lot of allocation towards that. The other, I would say, the other big thing that's kind of turned out positive from the budget is there's been no surprise, no big negative surprises coming through, especially on the capital market side, be it from long-term capital gains changes, short-term capital gains changes, or STT changes, and things of those sorts. So those, I would think, are also positives, things that have not happened. People were fearing that those would happen. They have not happened. So when I look at market, I think it's a composition of, it's driven by two things. One is PE multiple, the other is earnings. This is a slide which I keep constant through through the years whenever I've made a budget presentation. So obviously the internals keep changing. So the earnings growth expectations, as I mentioned, are fairly strong. This year itself, FY21, the year we are in currently, markets expecting about 20% earnings growth for Nifty, because of, I would say, more of margin expansion than anything else. Next year it's a 35%, and year after that 20%. I would say this budget supports that, at least on the domestic side. On the flows side, the P part, I would say it probably is positive in the sense that because it's supporting growth, I would say global flows, uh, people sitting outside would probably have more confidence in the earnings growth trajectory that that the sell side analysts have kind of painted. So to that extent, that's going to be positive. Domestically, I'm not very sure. Domestic flows from the institutional side have been far more tepid this year than in the past. So that is going to be a bit of a challenge. The other is on the earnings side. Earnings side, I think every single, I talk about five growth pillars to the India story: consumption, investments, commodities, exports, financials. I think all of them are firing. So if you look back in history over the last 5 years, we've seen index growing in that 4, 5, 6% kind of range, earnings, that is, for many years now. But I think the pickup in earnings growth that's happened this year and will continue in the next couple of years has been because of broadening that I talked about. So I think each of these pillars is going to deliver earnings growth. And I think that is going to lead to, I would say, performance for the broader market, which I will come to, which kind of reflects in the kind of stocks we kind of pushing right now. So these are the stocks we like. In the financials, we like the large cap private banks. Already ICICI Bank has run up quite a bit, but we still think that there is fair bit of upside there. Uh, um, uh, from a delta perspective, I would say something like a CUB, which is focused on MSME sector, uh, which I think will probably recover in the kind of growth environment we're talking about for FY22. I think the recovery could be fairly strong. I think CUB could be a big beneficiary. Chola would benefit from turnaround in the CV cycle and generally the auto cycle. IT services is a sector we've been fairly negative on for the last 5 years, but we think that the pandemic has resulted in a shift towards digitization, and we think growth is going to be faster and margins are going to recover. So yeah, HCL Tech Systems. The other stocks we've broadly been positive on. I think I just want to focus on a couple of other parts. I think the individual analysts are going to focus on some of these infrastructure spending beneficiary. I think Ultratech, Cement, Birla Corp, PNC Infra. These are companies which will definitely benefit from the kind of extra spending that one is seeing. I just want to focus on the risks. I think this is a very critical component because markets are trading at very significant multiples from a historical P perspective. I think while we in India are not so focused on the second wave of the corona, I think should new strains kind of come through, which do not, which are difficult to control from the existing vaccines in the market, then obviously that is going to be a bit of a challenge. That is one thing that I would kind of look out for. The second is inflation. Obviously, everybody is spending a lot of money, be it from the monetary side, be it from the fiscal side. I would say that inflation, both abroad, especially in the US, is something that one needs to kind of keep a very a close eye on. Obviously, in India, there could be a bit of a challenge too. So I would kind of end there, and I would transfer the baton to Teresa. Teresa, if you're there, you can unmute and you can start speaking. I'll run the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Hi. I'll just take it on from Girish. So from a broader economy perspective, the budget was broadly in line with what we were expecting. So we were expecting a growth supportive budget. And as Girish mentioned, the fiscal deficit for FY22, we were on the higher side of the market at 6.4%. The actual numbers for the fiscal deficit for FY22 are actually slightly higher than even our estimate at 6.8%. But I think the biggest surprise has been on the FY21 number. So while we and most of the market were working with a number, a fiscal deficit number of around 7.4%, the actual number in FY21 is around 9.5%. And this is largely coming from an increase in an increase in capex, which is higher than budgeted, but also from an increase in the revenue expenditure. So this is, given in the initial period, post the lockdown, the government has been actually very reluctant to spend, and they were expressing concerns, particularly concerns around a rating downgrade for India. But the positive side that we are seeing now is as growth is picking up, the government has become more confident, and they have decided to step in and kind of support the recovery. So a lot of the inhibitions that they had in the initial phase, of this COVID-19 crisis, that has now gone away, and they've been emboldened to come in and spend. That said, a large part of the spending is going to come in 4Q FY21. So if you see the total expenditure growth between FY21 RE and FY21 BE is only 1%. And if I just break up the 1%, it's a 26% growth in capital expenditure in FY22, and around about close to 3% decline in revenue expenditure. So a large part of the expenditure will come in, in the month of January, February, March in 2021. And even within that, if I just take it to the next slide, sorry, please. If I just, if I see what is kind of driving the revenue expenditure for in FY21 RE, a large part of it is coming from a sharp increase in the food subsidy bill. So the food subsidy bill, I'm not sure how visible the numbers are, but basically between last FY21 actual numbers and FY21, the revised estimates, there is a 288% increase in your food subsidy number. Now, a part of that can be explained because in the initial part of the COVID-19 crisis, there was a lot of support given to the bottom of the pyramid. So 80 crore people were given an increase in the food subsidy, and then that was eventually extended up to November 2020. So part of the increase is coming from there, but a little over 2 lakh crore of the increase in food subsidy is coming because so far, if you, you might have heard about the increase in off-budget spending by the government. Basically, apart from the borrowing that the government used to do in the market, the Food Corporation of India, in lieu of the food subsidies, used to borrow from the National Small Savings Fund. So actually what the government is now doing is making use of this crisis as an opportunity to kind of clean up its balance sheet. So the difference, a large part of the difference between the fiscal deficit that we were expecting at around 7.4% and the actual number that the government has set at 9.5% is coming from this increase in the food subsidy bill. I wouldn't call this entirely negative because, as I said earlier, the government is using this crisis as an opportunity to set right some of the other things, some of the things that which it was kind of hiding away from public view. So from that extent, it's positive. But if you really see the increase in revenue expenditure that is happening in FY22 will not be very large. It's only the capex that is going to increase. And even if I look at, sorry, if you can go to the next slide. So even within capex, what is going to actually increase is, so the government spending on capex is going to increase, at least according to the projection, by 26% in FY21 and by another 26% in FY22. But this is also coming at the expense of the PSUs kind of cutting down on some of their capex, which they normally do. So if you see, if I were to just look back from FY14 till about FY20, a large part of the capex was being done by PSUs because the private sector was not able to spend, and they did not have the incentive to spend, and government was constrained because of its finances. So a lot of the spending was done by the PSU. So now we are seeing a shift where the PSUs are cutting down on their spending, and the government is taking the capex spending onto its balance sheet. So net, it may not, even on capex, it may not be a big difference from what you saw in FY19, FY20, but it is largely government led spending coming in from its own balance sheet. Again, I mean, although there is a downside that PSUs may be cutting down on spending, but if I look at it from a structural perspective, this is a positive because I mean, so far the PSUs are being arm twisted by the government to spend. But now, and since the government is focusing a lot on privatization and of PSUs, again, a cleaning up of the PSU balance sheet would be helpful in their privatization drive. And obviously, secondly, I mean, the private sector, and even to that extent, because the capacity utilization now in the Indian economy overall is only about 70%, there is no real incentive to invest. I mean, barring in few specific sectors, maybe because they benefited from the PLI scheme, or certain sectors which may be benefiting from the government's infrastructure spend. So overall, what we have been saying is that given that the incentive for the private sector to invest is very limited, at least in the near term, because of low capacity utilization, the government needs to lead the capex recovery, and that is what they are actually doing. But from a market perspective, at least in the short term, it will be taken as positive because because the government's has shown a willingness to spend. Secondly, so the other part is, if you see what has really worked for the market. First is there has been no nasty tax surprises, which we were not expecting anything very big in terms of structural changes in the tax structure, but we were expecting a COVID cess, which has also not come through. So that is one reason why that you would see that you actually saw the market. So the market saw a very sharp rally today. And the second, as I mentioned earlier, is the government kind of shedding its inhibitions in terms of spending and going out to support growth, even though I would say some of that is front loaded in 4Q FY21. Thirdly is that, as I said, again, when we've had these previous budget presentation, I think a point that we always make is that we are not sure about the credibility of this the government's budget numbers. But I wouldn't say that this time. So largely the tax revenues look reasonably credible. Even the non-tax revenue, the government has not made any aggressive assumptions. Divestment target also, it is a little bit aggressive, but given that the pipeline is strong, and even last year they had budgeted for a 2.1 lakh crore, and given the way the markets are, they could even the 1.7 trillion divestment target that they have set could actually kind of sail through. And 1.75 trillion is what we were also expecting. So I would, even on the divestment front, I wouldn't say it is a very aggressive assumption. Although when you compare to the past, it does look a little bit on the higher side. The fourth is, I think, as Girish also mentioned, the focus on privatization and they have clearly stated their intent for strategic divestment, except in few sectors like atomic power and space, and to some extent in the banking and power sector. They have clearly said that they're all out in favor of privatization, including in the banking sector. So I think that tone itself, is positive from a market standpoint. And lastly, because of the government spending on infrastructure is going to benefit, not just pure play infrastructure companies, but the broader ancillary space like cement and steel, which are like important inputs for the infrastructure sector. And the tax projections, broadly, if you see here, they're talking about a 14.4% nominal GDP growth. That is their estimates. Our estimates are slightly lower at 11.6%. But because we're coming off a low base, even we were expecting around a 20% tax growth, even though our nominal GDP growth numbers were lower. And if you see, the government's numbers are not very different from what we were actually anticipating. So for FY22, it's around 22% direct tax growth, and even indirect taxes around 11.4, which is just slightly higher than our numbers. And from their perspective, it is justifiable because you're working with a slightly higher nominal GDP number. So from a tax, and for FY21, we actually feel that possibly the government could actually overshoot its FY21 revenue target. Because if you see the recent trend in GST collection, so in the first time since the launch of GST for January, we reach a GST target of around 1.2 lakh crore. This is the collections for December. So the month of January, February, March in terms of GST collections and even your excise duties on petrol and diesel, because the increase in mobility could surprise on the upside. So the government could actually overshoot their FY21 tax collections. Which could be positive. The fiscal deficit may actually end up slightly lower than the 9.5% that they are budgeting. If you could go to the next slide, please. So overall, although we are positive on the budget, and the market is also kind of rewarded with the run up that we saw today. Given the valuations that we are in and the run up that we've seen since March, I would highlight a few risks as well. One is, as I said, the government is working with a nominal GDP growth around 14.4%. Our own estimate is lower, at 11.6%, and we are working with a real GDP growth of around 7%. So a part of the increase in nominal GDP growth is largely coming from inflation. And given the way the situation with global liquidity, because global central banks have, if you see the G3 central banks have pumped in around $7 trillion in global liquidity in the whole of 2020, and even 2021, the commentary from the Fed, from the ECB all suggests that the global liquidity is here to stay, and they're not looking at a tapering of global liquidity anytime, at least in the near future. There is a possibility that commodity prices stay elevated, and that could push up inflation. So if inflation does go up, then you could see a situation where the RBI, may need to withdraw its accommodative monetary policy earlier than anticipated, which means that the huge borrowing program, which is now pegged at 12 trillion. For gross borrowing for 12 trillion FY22 could come under some pressure. For if FY21 itself, the government has actually increased their borrowing by 80,000 crore, which is the large part of the market was not actually anticipating. We were anticipating higher borrowing, but we thought that it would come through the short-term T-bill market. But so the government has increased both the short-term borrowing as well as the dated securities borrowing. So, although I do not see a risk in the near term that rates will go up, but as we proceed through FY22, if we see inflation come back, then the rise in interest rates could be a risk. The third risk that we see is that, the government is talking about a huge increase in capex for FY21 and FY22. The risk in, obviously from as of now, we see it as a positive. There is a risk that there could be a delays in implementation because capex, usually there is a longer life cycle when compared to revenue expenditure. So if there is a shortfall in capex, then we could end up in a position where revenue expenditure as it is budgeted to be a decline in FY22, and the capex doesn't happen as anticipated. You will probably end up with the fisc acting as a drag on growth compared to the at least the accommodative stance that we are expecting. So that could be a risk. So we would clearly watch out for implementation. A final risk, as I said, is because the government is expecting a large part of the revenue expenditure to come in 4Q FY21, and large part of that itself is driven by the government shifting some off-budget subsidies to the budget. The revenue expenditure for next year is only it's actually 1% total expenditure. The revenue expenditure is actually a 3% decline. So, but in the short term, what actually pushes up growth is your revenue expenditure, not your capex. The capex actually increases the productive capacity in the economy, but it has a longer term impact. So, if you see that revenue expenditure falls sharply and your capex doesn't doesn't pick up, then you could actually see a drag on growth in FY22. But this is as of now, probably that is not what the market is anticipating, but we would clearly watch out for the implementation and how the spending pattern turns out, particularly in the first half of FY22. So I think the sector analysts can take on from here.
Yeah, Ronak, can you come on and do this the
Yes,
sector
sir.
part and in a very crisp way? Don't get into too many details, but obviously the key ones, yes. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. So, for the auto sector, one of the key announcement from the budget was the announcement for the of the much awaited scrappage policy. So, it will be a voluntary scrappage policy where private vehicles older than 20 years and commercial vehicles older than 15 years will have to undergo fitness tests. So, details of the scheme will be announced separately by the ministry. But we think this is a very good step and a step further to the recently proposed green tax on the old vehicles, which disincentivizes running of old vehicles. So as per the industry experts, there are over 2.5 million commercial vehicles which are plying on road and which are aged 15 years and above. And both these measures should encourage the replacement demand, which hasn't seen any meaningful pickup over last 2 years. The second key announcement was on the PLI scheme for the auto sector. The auto sector auto and auto component sector captures a significant share of the budgeted allocation for the PLI scheme, which is and it will be about 570 billion allocation for auto sector. Apart from this, what we so most it is likely that the PLI scheme will be more export focused for auto, vis-a-vis high, focused on higher localization for other sectors. The third one was the increase of the custom duty on auto components. Last budget we saw an increase in the increase in the custom duty on auto components from 10 to 15%. And there were some components which were left out, and those components saw an increase in the custom duty this time. So both these measures, PLI scheme and the increase in the custom duty, uh, uh, are the steps further towards higher localization and more exports from India. Uh, the next one is on the proposed. The budget proposed a new scheme where various public-private participatory models will be introduced to enable private sector players to finance, operate, and maintain over 20,000 buses. The budgeted outlay is about 180 billion rupees, and so this proposal is likely to provide relief to the passenger commercial vehicle sector, which has been severely impacted on account of COVID-19. One more announcement, which was a general announcement, was on the reduction in the custom duties and temporary revocation of additional dumping duties on steel imports. Currently, auto sector is facing a lot of supply constraints, especially on the steel side, and also there is an inflationary pressure because of the rise in the price of the steel. And this announcement will provide some relief to the auto industry in the near term. Our topics from the sector will be Ashok Leyland, which will be the beneficiary of the scrappage policy, Bajaj Auto, which we believe is a beneficiary will be the beneficiary of the PLI scheme, and Maruti, M&M, and Hero MotoCorp, which will be more of a rural focused play. That's it on auto.
Next, we have Raghav Garg, who's going to speak on the BFSI space.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll cover banks and NBFCs as one sector, and then I'll get on to the insurance sector. So in the banks and NBFC space, one of the key announcement is setting up of the development finance institution. We believe that should provide growth opportunities, especially for the corporate credit. Plus, if you consider the overall thrust that the government has on infra spending, I think that will present a lot of growth opportunities for the banking sector. The second key announcement that we think is good is the recapitalization of the PSBs to the extent of about 200 billion or 20,000 crores. So if you consider the kind of capital position that PSBs have, which is quite weak, we think that this is a step in the positive direction. They've also announced setting up of an ARC to take over and manage the stressed accounts of the banking sector. So this could potentially result in faster resolution of bad assets. Plus, we think that this would help release significant amount of bandwidth on part of the banks and enable them to focus on growth opportunities. The reduction in loan amount that's eligible for admission to SARFAESI from 50 lakhs to 20 lakhs is also a positive for the NBFCs and banks from an NPA recovery standpoint. The last point that's a positive is the extension of the extension by 1 year for availing the additional deduction of 1.5 lakh rupees on interest paid on home loans. So this should boost demand for affordable housing and therefore should benefit NBFCs. On the insurance sector, so there are two announcements largely. One is the FDI limit, which has been increased from 49% to 74%. We think that this has been much awaited and is a positive for the insurance sector, both life and non-life, as it would help the incumbent companies to tap foreign capital and expertise. What we found negative in the budget regarding the insurance sector is that the taxation of maturity proceeds on ULIPs, where the premium payable is about is 2.5 lakhs or above. That is a negative for the life insurance companies which have a ULIP-oriented portfolio. Especially for a company like ICICI Pru, given that it caters to the higher end of the customer segment. Amongst the topics that we have, we prefer SBI Life and HDFC Life. We like HDFC Limited on the housing opportunity that's there in India, and in the banking sector, our preferred picks would be ICICI Bank and SBI. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Yeah, we now move to the consumer durables and capital goods space. I would invite Chirag to speak on this.
Yeah, thank you and good evening to everyone. So on the consumer durable space, the government has sustained its aim of incentivizing and attracting local manufacturing by increasing the customs duty on components. So basic custom duties on mobile phone components such as printed circuit board assembly, camera module and connectors have been increased from 0 to 2.5. Similarly, on compressors of AC and refrigerator, it has been increased from 12.5 to 15. And on LED lights and fixtures component, it has been increased from 5 to 10%. So this is in line with government's phased manufacturing program, where government intends to increase this custom duty so as to encourage domestic players to get into component level manufacturing, as well as to encourage foreign players to set up their factories in India. So while these measures will temporarily, for 1 or 2 years, will increase the cost of manufacturing of these products, but we are already seeing a trend where these global manufacturing players are setting up their factories in India, because government has clearly spelled out that under the phased manufacturing program, which came in 2019, over a 5-year period, government will keep increasing these duties. So for example, on compressors of AC and refrigerator, government has already stated that duty will become 20% in 5-year period. Already in the first 3 years, it has increased from 7.5 to 10 to 12.5 and now to 15. So over the next 2 years, again, it will go from 15 to 20. So as a result, global compressor giants like GMCC are already setting up factories in India. And this will actually lead to, for the domestic brands like Voltas, Blue Star, etc., a significant shift in their sourcing model from imports earlier to locally sourced now. For contract manufacturers like Dixon Technologies, etc., this will not make any difference, because anyways, they operate on an OEM-based business model, where any rise in input cost or duties is a pass-through to their customer brands, basically. So that is on the durable sector. On capital goods sector, it is a beneficiary of the measures to provide boost to infrastructure and housing capex that has been announced in the budget today. So the robust capex announced for infrastructure sector through various subsectors like metro projects, railway electrification, water, etc., will be beneficial for project companies such as Voltas, Blue Star, KEC International, Solar Industries, etc., as it increases their addressable market. Similarly, to promote affordable housing, the consumer durable and electrical companies will benefit because they directly supply products like white goods and brown goods, which goes into a household purchase. So both these sectors measures will be elaborated in a greater detail by the sector's respective analysts. For capital goods sector, our top pick is Solar Industries India, which will also be a beneficiary of the boost on infrastructure because they supply packaged explosives which are used in infrastructure projects. And in durables and electrical sector, we prefer Blue Star and Crompton Greaves Consumer Electricals. So that's it from me.
We now have Mangesh speaking on the cement and the infrastructure sector, cement sector first.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So the budget has been really good for infrastructure and construction activities. And in fact, the focus of the government is on capital expenditure, which augurs well for both these sectors. Cement generally is an indirect beneficiary of increased capital investment in the country, and the 26% growth in capital expenditure from the revised FY21 capex of 4.39 trillion to 4.39 lakh crores to 5.54 basically is going to have very good cement demand growth. Now, what we have seen is that in FY21 also, the government is actually spending more than what we would have expected them to. And that's why cement demand recovery has been fastest after the lockdown as well as after the pandemic. So what we have earlier, we were expecting that the cement demand growth in 21 should actually decline by more than 10%. But now we are of the opinion that the demand decline in 21 should be in the range of 2 to 5%. That's a very good achievement given the fact that for almost a month and a half, there was no work being done in this year. What it does is basically sets a stage for next year, wherein we expect that from this low base and continuing the current momentum, the demand growth could actually grow. Demand growth could actually be in double digits. So we're expecting around 11 to 12% demand growth next year because of all the positive measures that have been taken in the budget. So the measures including the national infrastructure pipeline projects, which I'll discuss again in infra, and the extension for the tax exemption for housing, as well as various other measures for rural demand. Those augur well for cement demand. And the sector is actually looking at sustainable, positive demand growth for a long time. And that's why we think that it's a very positive budget for cement. Within cement, I think within the large caps, one should always own Ultratech, which has very large capacity and low utilization. So any demand growth in the system, he's the one, this is the company which can actually target more of that incremental demand. And within mid caps, I think we like Birla Corp and Sagamore, which probably should also be the beneficiaries of increased demand. So look at companies which have excess capacity or in the process of adding more capacity, which then can cater to the increased demand in the sector. So that's on cement. Girish, should I take up infra now or later?
You can take up infra now.
Yeah. So infra, if you see the budget speech, if you hear the budget speech, I think most of the announcement that have been made by has been really good. In the past, what we have seen is that there have been a lot of announcement in terms of spending on various schemes or increased outlays on various schemes. But in this time around, what they have mentioned is that the national infrastructure pipeline, which is a very large scheme, wherein more than 105 lakh crores of projects will be undertaken over the 5-year period. So this is unlike what we have seen in the past. And when that was announced, when I had said that even if 50% of that gets executed, I think the order books as well as for cement demand, it will be really good. What government has done is they have actually announced 2 more really good positive steps of funding that NIP. So there is one thing of announcing it and stating that we would be spending so much more, but to create the kind of environment in which the spending will be possible is what I think we have seen in this budget. So 2 key highlights which I want to, 2 key things which I want to highlight are they announced development financial institution, wherein they would put up first 20,000 crores as equity and which can fund projects up to 5 trillion over the next 3 years. The problem with infrastructure sector is that the work is very high, but finance or capital is very low. So banks are not willing to fund infrastructure sector because of the problems they have seen in the past. And the key reason for that is the project cash flows of infrastructure projects and the timelines for the debt that they take are different. So the project can be a 20 or even a 30-year project, but the debt they have to take is for 10 years. So the cash flows in initial years is extremely low, and the tail and most of the cash flows are front loaded. So they generally don't end up making any money in it. But with this DFI, I think the cash flows will be matched substantially with all the long-term projects being funded through this DFI. I think it's a very good move, and once implemented, I think it can act as the go-to source for all the large infrastructure projects in the country. What it will also mean is that all these projects will get financial closures very early, and they don't have to rely on bank. What it also does is it takes out a lot of the burden from the bank side to fund these projects. So overall, I think it's a win-win situation. Second announcement, which is a landmark announcement in my opinion, is the monetization of assets. So government has said that they would be recycling the brownfield assets of the country. That means they would utilize the completed assets to generate more capital to fund the new ones. So they have given out all the parameters, like they would be selling out or monetizing the completed road projects, the dedicated freight corridor, the transmission lines, oil and gas pipelines, warehouses, sports stadiums. That's going to help generate the capital that is much needed. So that's the reason why I think this budget has been really good. Even on the roads and railway, I think it's a phenomenal budget. And most of the construction companies, if you see now, they're trading at single-digit P, and I think all of them should see a re-rating from here on. Within the large caps, I think larger ones, I think L&T, NCC still look good. Smaller ones, PNC Infra, Dilip Buildcon, KNR are the ones that we would like.
Okay. I would then let's move to specialty chemicals. We have Abhishek Navalgund who's going to speak on that. Abhishek.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. So in the specialty chemical space, we don't see any specific announcement in this budget, which might have a material impact on the earnings of the companies that we cover. However, the kind of infra and agri push that we have seen from the government side, I believe this will indirectly benefit some of these companies who cater to sectors like construction, paint and coatings, water treatment chemicals, and agrochemicals. So overall, our view on specialty chemicals, if we see, we like some of the leaders like SRF, Naveen, Aarti, and Vinati, which are leaders in their respective chemistry on a global platform. And we expect the strong earnings momentum to continue on the back of import substitution opportunities and China Plus One, which is playing well for them. All these companies have basically invested on R&D significantly over the last decade. Also, there is a lot of capacity addition that is being done from all the players. So just to give a data point, basically capex during the last 5 years for all these companies is more than 2x compared to the earlier 5-year period. And we expect further acceleration on the capex side in the coming 3 to 5 years. Also, we've started getting multi-year contracts despite having competition from China. So these are all positive developments, and this happens only on the back of deeper client engagements and clearly strengthening R&D, which is extremely important in the chemical space. So while we are structurally positive on all the 4 companies which I just mentioned, we specifically prefer fluorination companies, which are SRF and Naveen. We believe there's a huge opportunity at the complex end of the fluorination, and I think because of the rising fluorine salience in both pharma and agro, and CRAMS, which is a multi-year story in my view, both these players can basically, we should remain invested in these 2 names. The other 2 are Aarti and Vinati, which could be biggest beneficiaries from the import substitution opportunity in my view. So that's it on my side. I'll stop here.
Okay, since we can't get Ramesh to unmute, let's move to Vishal, who will cover the consumer sector. Vishal?
Yeah, hi, thank you and good evening all. So on the consumer space, if you see from a staples as well as from a discretionary perspective, there was no major big bang reforms or changes which is directly impacting our consumer sector coverage. But we think that some of these announcements will basically indirectly benefit employment and obviously demand generation in the next few quarters, or maybe from a more than a 1 year point of view. 2-3 points that I want to highlight, which might be relevant from a consumer sector coverage. First is obviously in terms of cigarettes and ITC. There's no mention of a change in duty structure or addition of cess on cigarettes in the budget documents. So this no negative news is seen as a positive news for the cigarette or the tobacco industry. There was obviously an expectation that could be a levy of COVID cess on cigarettes, and because the news is obviously neutral, it's seen as a big positive for ITC, at least for the next 1 year till the next budget. Second key highlight that I want to keep is in terms of imposition of agriculture, infrastructure and development cess on alcoholic beverages at around 100%. But there is also a reduction in basic customs duty to 50%, which was earlier 150% for hard liquor and 100% for beer. So net for alcoholic or for hard liquor, there is a reduction in the final price, and for beer the price remains same. So slightly positive for United Spirits from that point of view. Or for crude palm oil, there is a introduction of agri infra cess of around 17.5%, but the BCD, which is basic custom duty, has been reduced to 15% from 27.5% earlier. Net there is obviously a reduction in the price. And for similarly for crude soybean and sunflower oil, while there is an introduction of agri cess of around 20%, the basic custom duty has been reduced to 15% from 35% earlier. So there is also a reduction in the final price for this commodity. So the last two, which is crude palm oil and crude soybean and sunflower oil, are a key raw material which is imported by some of these staple companies or FMCG companies. So that's a positive for those companies. And a slight positive for United Spirits, which is basically benefiting their imported portfolio, which currently is a very small portion of the company. Lastly, I just want to highlight that from a rural point of view, some of the measures regarding social security benefits, which is extended to the gig and the platform workers, as well as in terms of MSP increasing to a good extent in the current fiscal. And the rural sector is obviously seeing these benefits in the current fiscal. I think it will continue for at least for the next few quarters in terms of rural growing pretty well. In terms of top picks, we continue to maintain a positive view on Hindustan Unilever. I think this stock has been an underperformer for the last 1 year, improving for the next few quarters. And similarly, good rural plays would be Dabur and Imami in the staple space. In the discretionary space, we have a positive view on the two alcoholic beverages company, which is United Spirits and United Beverages. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got Ramesh back on, so I would ask him to speak on the chemical sector.
Yeah, thank you and good evening. So on the chemical sector, we didn't have any direct measures to take an immediate positive view, but there were some cues which we believe are positive. They have cut import duty on naphtha from 4 to 2.5%, and this is possibly the initial step the government is taking to encourage large petrochemical investments to support the Make in India for raw materials intermediates. That will eventually help the chemical sector for sourcing materials and becoming a major supply source in this region. Secondly, there is this 5% agricultural infrastructure development cess on the import of urea, DAP, and muriate of potash. Now the cess on urea is understandable, as this is possibly in line with the policy to discourage excessive use of urea to reduce the nitrogen in Indian soil. And on DAP, I think it will possibly pose some challenge for the companies which are importing DAP, but it's positive in terms of encouraging domestic manufacture. In terms of the fertilizer subsidies, I think we need to look at the current year's provision compared to the budget estimate of last year rather than the revised estimate. So if you see compared to the revised estimate of last year, it's down 41%, but the revised estimate includes an additional allocation of 65,000 crores of 650 billion to settle all the dues as on date. If you were to look at the estimate for this year at 795 billion compared to the last year's budget estimate, it's up 11.5%. The only point is I think the provision for urea is okay, but for the NBS subsidy provision for the phosphatics might just about be tight. In the event of any spike in global chemical prices and freight rates, there could be some challenges in terms of getting the subsidy rates and payments in time to manage the working capital. But the company will cover. Coromandel has a fairly healthy balance sheet, so I don't think it should be a major worry. And overall, I think the government has talked about sustaining the pro-agri measures in this budget, and the headline allocation for agri and allied activities at 1483 billion or thereabouts is a positive thing. And they've already talked about raising MSP for last year and this year's agricultural season, and fixed doubling farm income. And I think in terms of specific measures, the allocation of micro irrigation to NABARD, which has been doubled to 10,000 crores, 100 billion, is positive for reducing excess watering and improving the farming techniques. And this is, going to be positive for the CPC and fertilizer sector in the long run. And they've also got other measures like the support for crop insurance. In terms of the concerns, there was some news doing the rounds about the zero budget natural farming policy, which is seemingly negative for the fertilizer companies and some extent the chemical pesticide companies. I think this is only talking about giving a share of the government subsidies to farmers. You use natural fertilizers and pesticides, and in the long run, it will support safer and newer products and fertilizer and pesticide products. And to that extent, I think it will encourage innovative companies. And we are positive on Coromandel and Sumitomo Chemicals India. So that's my summary on the chemical sector.
Is there one slide on oil and gas?
Yeah, it is there.
Yeah, just hold on. I'll just get that. Yeah. Okay.
Now coming to oil and gas, again, I think the measures announced are some of them are not in the hands of the budget, but more policy statements, but they are positive. Like the announcement that the city gas distribution networks will be extended to 100 more districts, and this possibly implies the 11th round of auction indicated by the PNGRB for some time. And this will be positive for city gas distribution companies, the oil marketing companies, GAIL and GSPL, who are all potential bidders, and that will enable them to win some of these licenses and invest and grow the city gas business. We'll also see the gas aggregation business of GAIL in transportation and marketing, and Petronet LNG, which imports LNG, and GSPL, which has a transportation network in Gujarat, benefiting from the overall increase in gas demand growth as we see the CGD networks expand. In terms of the disappointment, obviously the excise duty changes in the petrol and diesel are negligible. And the key thing to remember is that the road and infrastructure cess of 18 rupees is still intact. So it is not going to move the needle much in terms of the current excise duty structure. So perhaps the government is of the view that the industry is able to make reasonable profits, and there's an expectation that oil prices cool off. So we need to see how the industry is able to handle this high excise duty, particularly the oil prices continue to remain firm. And in terms of subsidies, I think we have seen the subsidies come down based on the overall rationalization as well as the easing of oil prices. So it's not a major worry, but if oil prices go up and on the fixed number of connections under subsidized LNG, if the subsidy increases, that could pose some interim challenges for the ONGCs. And there's also the Ujjwala LPG scheme where they've increased the connections by 10 million connections, and that will drive the growth in LPG. But in terms of the receivables from the government, can lead to some lag, and to that extent, that's a marginal concern. But so far, the industry has been able to manage that, without too much of damage to working capital. So overall, in terms of the stock picks, we are positive on the gas aggregators, GAIL, Petronet LNG, and GSPL in the mid caps. And we also like the refiners, particularly HPCL in the next 1 year, and IOC in the longer term. And BPCL, the divestment has now been, deferred to FY 21-22, and that should be a tactical, tailwind for the stock. So we are positive on that as well. That concludes my presentation on India.
Thanks, Ramesh. Just hold on. Let me just see what. Okay, consumer infrastructure. Okay, IT. I did make a very brief mention about it. So there's no direct impact on IT from the budget. I think there is going to be a substantial impact from an indirect standpoint. Because if the domestic sectors do well, especially if the BFSI sector does well, which already based on what we've seen in today's stock market performance, it does seem to be the case. And the concern around asset quality kind of dissipates, I would say that that could mean incremental flow of money back into the BFSI space to the detriment of the IT sector. So one of the reasons why the IT sector did well, from the middle of 2020, probably till September, October of, or maybe even November of 2020, was because there was a lot of concern surrounding asset quality of banks and NBFCs, which were quite heightened post the moratorium. Obviously, subsequent discussions with the banks indicate that the challenge is not as large as what people feared it was. So in the interim, there was some bit of shift of money away from the banking space to the IT space, and obviously there was also a tailwind from the I would say the demand side. So the whole digital pickup, because the pandemic has helped the companies, and I think we've also seen a reversal in the margin picture. So margins have improved quite substantially, both in September as well as in the December quarters, because of lower spending on travel, marketing, and there is a very large benefit coming from the offshoring side and higher utilization. So our take on the IT sector, as I mentioned, we've been fairly negative on it for almost like 5 years, and we kind of turned neutral because we felt that the stock run up has been fairly substantial by the time we kind of put out a report. So we were very selective in terms of which stocks we kind of pushed. So the stocks currently we are positive on. One is HCL Tech on the large cap side, and the other is Persistent Systems on the mid cap side. And one of the reasons from an overall sector perspective why we think it's going to is in a better shape is because we think earnings growth is going to be in that, at least for the tier one companies, would be in that mid-teen territory versus like a 6-7% kind of range that it was in over the last 5 years. So there's an earnings acceleration which is 2x of what it was previously, and the BFSI space wasn't doing too well. So there was some shift of money shift of money into IT. I think probably there is a reverse trade that is probably going to play out in the next 6-12 months, which could be a bit of a detrimental to the IT sector. But having said that, I think the fundamental picture remains the same. And I would say the mid-cap companies, I won't say all of them look interesting right now, because there's been a fair bit of run-up and valuations look very expensive for quite a few of them. But Persistent Systems, in my view, represents a very interesting bet. I think there's a new management which has kind of come in, which in our view is kind of doing the right things in terms of driving visible growth, in terms of driving large deals. And we think that the earnings growth for Persistent Systems could be as high as like 30%, both FY20 to FY23, and even between FY21 and 23. But this is vis-a-vis a 4% growth that it saw between FY15 and FY20. So the stock didn't do anything at all in that 5-year time frame, but I think it's almost tripled in the last 6 to 9 months. I think there's still more runway for the stock to move up. So these are two stocks we like. So IT sector, we would stay neutral as a vis-a-vis benchmark. The large cap space, HCL Tech, smaller companies, you would kind of push Persistent Systems. So that's an IT. I would then move to pharma, where I would now ask Vishal Manchanda, our analyst, to speak. Vishal?
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Vishal Manchanda. On the pharma sector, we didn't have any announcement that benefited or adversely impacted the sector at large, but there were two very specific announcements. One was the government will roll out pneumococcal vaccine as part of the universal immunization program. So pneumonia is a very large prevalent disease in India that leads to infant mortality. So this disease is now covered under UIP, wherein government will buy vaccines from private players and provide it to the population at large free of cost. So this, if you look at the pneumococcal vaccine space, among the Indian players, one is Aurobindo Pharma and another is Serum Institute. So Aurobindo Pharma doesn't have an approval as yet, but they are expecting an approval by end of this year. So once they have an approval, this would be $100 million market, and it would be shared between two players. So it would be kind of a $50 million annual sales opportunity for Aurobindo, and it'll keep recurring every year. So it's a meaningful development for Aurobindo Pharma. The other is the healthcare outlay has been increased 137% on a YOY basis. But the primary contributor to this higher outlay is increasing spend towards COVID vaccination. So this COVID vaccination spend will be so only a listed entity that is close to bringing out a COVID vaccine and has got very credible data with itself is Dr. Reddy. So they have the Russian vaccine that they are developing in phase 3 trials. So these are the two beneficiaries out of budget. In the sector, our top picks currently are Sun Pharma and Cipla. On Sun Pharma, we like the company because they are the only large cap company that has been able to successfully build a specialty franchise. So when I say a specialty franchise, I mean a portfolio that is patent protected. So such a patent protected portfolio actually helps deliver better free cash flow generation, and it is not subject to price erosion like we have the generic business, which keeps eroding every year. So this on account of a large specialty portfolio, what we'll see is Sun Pharma would be able to deliver structural growth in the US, and even in India their branded portfolio is largely chronic in nature. So since chronic market is growing faster than the Indian pharma market, we should expect Sun Pharma to grow faster than peers. When the valuations are not demanding, the stock trades at 19 times FY23 earnings, and there is a potential chance that the FY23 earnings, there is a good chance for a large upside on the FY23 earnings if they are able to crack something on the complex generic front. The other name we like in pharma is Cipla, which also has a very resilient business. So they have their US business is composed of very small assets, and even the large assets that they have are not subject to price erosion because those are very competitively priced. And Cipla has just begun monetizing its pipeline in the US. So it's currently a $550-600 million business. But in the next 3 to 4 years, we should see this business grow from $600 million to $1 billion. And there is very large operating leverage in the US business. So whatever incremental sales that they'll generate out of the US business, we potentially can see about 35 to 40% incremental EBITDA generation from the incremental sales. So which should help the EPS move up very sharply going forward. Likewise, their India business, they have kind of they are kind of focusing to build this up meaningfully. They have kind of divided this business into 3 parts: trade generics, consumer health, and branded prescription generics. They are providing all the essential management bandwidth and focus to build each of these segments. So they are giving very proper conditions for each of these segments to grow properly. Cipla trades at 18x FY23 EPS. Again, it's lower than some of its large cap peers and offers better growth prospects. So that is where we would end our pharmaceutical sector review.
Thanks, Vishal.
Uh, we'll now move to the real estate sector. Amit?
Yeah, hi. Am I audible, Girish?
Yeah, you are.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. This budget was actually a disappointment in terms of real estate sector. She didn't talk at all in the budget speech about the real estate sector. And if you go through the fine print, what has been there, what was given last year has just been extended this year. So if you see the key points out there, Section 80 IBA refers to the projects which are in affordable housing. So tax holiday on profits has been extended from 31st March 21 to 31st March 22. Similarly, for affordable rental housing, that is basically for these workers, they've extended the tax holiday on profits for that particular business also. The deduction of 1.5 lakhs for interest paid on housing. Earlier, it was there for till 21, March 21. Now it's been extended to March 22. Again, it's for affordable housing, very categorically mentioned in the notes in the notes out there that the stamp duty value should not increase, should not be more than 45 lakhs. The new thing which has come in is that no TDS on dividend payments made to business, which is REITs, and it will be applicable retrospectively. So it will be beneficial for REITs depending on how much of dividend payments they have. Finally, the last point which is there, increase in the safe harbor limit. This has already been announced. She's just formalized it by putting it into the budget statement. So this is basically if your stamp duty or registration value is lower than the circle rate, then normally you're charged at the circle rate. Here, if it's lower by about 20%, then you'll be charged 20% compared to circle rate, then you will be charged at the stamp duty value, not at the circle rate value. So overall, a bit of a disappointing budget. For the real estate sector. It will benefit companies focused on the affordable housing, which could be companies like Ashiana Housing, etc. Within our universe, it will not impact most of the companies, including the residential focused companies like Shobhat or Prestige or any of these ones, because a very small portion of the housing is actually 45 lakhs and below. So our topic still remains NESCO within this within our universe. Thank you.
So yeah, it's another stimulus which has been provided by FM. You had seen that it's in the form of the fiscal deficit. Government is not worried about the fiscal deficit and want to revive the economy, and as such it is growth supporting. And even the expenditures are also in the right direction, that is capital expenditure. I'm not talking much about all these because you had already heard all these things. So we'll try to focus on the things which I would like to add from here. So it is definitely indirectly beneficial to financial, capital goods and infrastructure sector. Why I said indirectly? Because there is no, we don't see any upgradation of earning because of this budget, or any analyst will not come up with any great upgradation of earning in this post this budget. So all these things are definitely supporting economy and stimulating the economy, but it will all be indirect benefit of which will be coming to the all these sectors. And the key thing in this is the implementation, because indirectly when it will implement and when the actual benefit will flow to the economy and to the particular company will all depend on the implementation of these steps which has been taken in this budget. So what we see that the biggest positive was there is no negative. People were expecting that there could be short-term or long-term capital gain on shares purchase sale, or there could be some STT increase, or there could be a major cess which may be coming, but nothing is there. Not even individual or corporate tax is also not there. Not even which was commonly accepted by the people that there will be some duty on the cigarette, that is also missing. So in all, no negative, so which automatically became positive. We had seen market correcting before the budget, and definitely when there was no negative, market has taken that as a positive. So point is that I'd like to try to connect the budget with the current market situation. If you see Q3 earnings are showing revival, and we had reached to over COVID earnings. If you see out of 200 BSE companies, around 68 companies has declared result till Thursday. And in that, they had shown 2% sales growth and 11% EBITDA growth. So growth is already there year on year against last year levels. So we are above COVID. And Q3 earnings were driven by lot of other factors also apart from revival. That is, there were a lot of pent-up demand which came up in this revival. There was a restocking and there was a festival demand as well. And the biggest factor is that inflationary commodity prices has also supported a lot of sectors which revived, which helped it to revive the earnings of lot many companies. Even logistic issue also helped a company to take comparatively better prices for their products and all. So in all, there was a point that the earnings are back. And if we connect it with budget, before this budget, we were of the view that in the current scenario, whether the Q4 result will be better than Q3 or not. So we were divided on that. But looking at this budget, it seems like there is a possibility that since it is supporting to the growth, so quite possible Q4 may see some benefit of this revival or this stimulus in the earning. So to that extent, it is positive for the market. So what we see that this stimulus has come at very right time when we are at the cusp of reaching to the pre-COVID level, and now you are providing the stimulus. So that is the correct time to revive the economy. Another point which is more important is that if this COVID would not have been there, the government would not have taken such a liberal measures to revive the economy. They would not have been in that situation. But this helped the economy to revive or to put stimulus additionally and revive the economy. So overall budget will support the earning, though indirectly. So apart from this, if we see India has provided this stimulus with this budget, but apart from that, if we see the world over, this liquidity inflow in all these economies, developed economy is continuing and to a very large extent. If you see the fiscal deficit, fiscal stimulus by US or a developed nation is almost at around 8.5% of their GDP, monetary stimulus 14%, and credit stimulus is over 10%. So FY22 stimulus was around 5 times that of 2008 and 9. So that is quite big, and this stimulus is not yet stopped. US is still continuing this stimulus. So money is continuously poured into the economy to revive it. If you see, US has approved 900 million stimulus recently, and thereafter now the new president is talking about another 1.2 trillion. And then again, they are talking about another stimulus of around 2 trillion for revival to revive the investments in February or March month. So continuous stimulus are being talked. So what is the going forward for all these things? So there has to be two things which can restrict these stimulus or money printing, is that either the economy revive, like what has happened last time, or the inflation come back. So what we are seeing in the US up till now, the economy revival is still away from the pre-COVID level. And that will take, it looks like that may take another some time, though on a improvement path. But if you see the inflation side, no doubt, apparently current inflations are not showing any sign of any great threat, but the expectation of inflation for the future is already over COVID, pre-COVID level. If you see the graph down, this graph, then the inflation is already moving up a lot. So it can have a bit concerns on the overall market if this inflation continue to move up. So apart from that, if we see, we saw recently a corrections in the Indian market. Market before today's move was down by around 6.9% from January high. And similar was the case with the other market as well. If you see the Hong Kong market, it was down by around 6.3%, Brazil 6.5%, Russia 6%, Indonesia 8.9%, and Korea 7.3%, and Taiwan 6.3%. So there was a money moving out of the emerging market in last few days from all these countries. No doubt today we had seen a good move in other Asian, other emerging market also, apart from India as well. So India has moved up by around 4%, but the other market is also positive by 1.5, 2% as well. So the point is that because of the inflation concern, or maybe because of this penny stock movement which has happened in the US market, there are some concerns emerging on this money being put to emerging market, and there is some reversal of money from the emerging market. So one need to be very watchful of this particular fact that if the money start going back from to its origin, then we may face concerns on that account. Though budget is very good, but the key point is that where we are right now. So if this budget would have come at say when the market was at around 10,000 or 11,000 or around those levels, then there was no risk of these valuations and upper side. But we are already very costly. In fact, if you see the valuations are at around 20 times, over 20 times 1 year forward earning, and which is the highest, even higher than the 2007 when the bubble was there and the valuation reached to around 19 times. So we are still right now even over that. So though it's a budget is a very good budget, but it has come at a time when the valuations are very costly. So one need to be very watchful of the movement of liquidity, because all these run up has been driven by liquidity. Excess valuation has been driven by liquidity. So if liquidity is sustained, then definitely market will continue to perform. But if the liquidity start going back to its origin, then even this good budget may has a scope for this market to correct from here. So apart from that, if I conclude, the budget is definitely very good budget and stimulating budget to the economy. And this budget is likely to, this stimulus or support is likely to continue for some time as the fiscal fiscal deficit target has been will be coming down over a period of next 5 years. So there could be higher deficits in the coming year as well to support the economy. So this can continue for some time. There was no negative in the budget, and that itself made the market positive. Q3 results are seeing growth year on year, as such reaching higher than the pre-COVID level, and stimulus can help to revive the growth, which we may see in coming period. Benefit of the budget will be more of an indirect, as there is no direct upgradation of earning to the budget. So if the budgets are, if the earnings are not getting upgraded and the market moves up, only the PE will move up, not the earning. And we need to see how all these measures get implemented. As such, key thing is that valuations are costly, and this will cap the upside to the market. So overall, what we see that the budget is a long-term positive and will depend a lot more on the implementation of this budget. Now, what I'll ask Jihan to talk about stock specific.
Uh, uh, yeah, good evening, everyone. Sir, if we can move the slide, move to the next slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So our first stock is Cholamandalam Investment and Finance. So as Girish sir initially commented, we also like this stock. Chola belongs to the Murugappa Group, and it has emerged as a comprehensive credit provider, and vehicle finance is around 3/4 of the book. SME LAP is 20%, and the remaining 5% is home loans. Around 80 odd percent of the loan book comes from rural areas. Total loan book size is around 75,000 crores. As a conscious strategy since FY12, Chola started diversifying, to newer segments where it was not present, like tractors, home loans, construction equipment, which today, after 8 years of efforts, has become around 16% of the total loan book. And some aspects which differentiate Chola from other vehicle financiers are, first of all, the product segments that it is present in is very well diversified. Present in every segment from CVs, cars, two-wheelers, MUVs, construction equipment. Secondly, if we look at the track record of last 5 years and compare it with other companies like MMF, Mahindra Mandya Financial, Sundaram Finance, Shriram Transport Finance, so this Chola has grown at 20% CAGR versus around 12-13% CAGR for these three companies. So it has increased its market share. Asset quality has been the hallmark for Chola. So if we compare historical credit cost, Chola has around 70-75 basis points of credit cost, compared to almost 3 to 4 times of credit cost for peers like Mahindra Financial and Shriram Transport Finance. So what Chola follows a strategy is of targeting better quality customers, where the yields would be lower by, let's say, 50-75 basis points than these kind of other players. But on the other hand, the credit cost more than compensates for the lower yields because of better quality customers. So that is the reason that Chola has consistently delivered 18% kind of ROE in recent years. If we talk about COVID scenario currently, around today morning, the company held its Q3 con call. So that data is not updated here in the slide, but they said that non-paying customers since the moratorium began today stand at just 2% of the loan book. And against that, company has done provisioning of has COVID provisions of 1%. So essentially, more or less, they are done with the COVID-related stress, and maybe one more quarter just to be on the prudent side, they might increase this provision further. But from FY22 starting, they won't have any impact of stress in credit cost. Based on the best-in-class proven asset quality track record of this company, we expect loan growth of 20% for next couple of years and PAT growth of 30% plus for next couple of years. ROE should stabilize to around 20 odd percent, and we recommend buy with a target price of 570 at 3.3 times FY23 book value, which has been its +1 standard deviation based on historical valuations. Sir, if we can move to Aisher.
Yeah, it's there, na?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Royal Enfield has a niche in the cruise biking segment, and over last 10 years, the company has done really well. They have immense pricing power in this segment because of lack of competition, which is visible in the gross margins. which is at 48% versus no rest of the players between 25 to 30%. After witnessing headwinds for last 18 months, we expect volumes to recover from now. So last couple of months, volumes have again come in the positive territory. Royal Enfield is now focusing on expanding the addressable market through distribution expansion via smaller format stores, by focusing on penetrating states where two-wheeler penetration is very low, like UP, MP, and Rajasthan, Gujarat. Also, they are targeting to offer various levels, multiple formats of their versions of bikes at various price points. Also focus on middleweight segment, where they have been saying for some time that they want to create and expand their export markets. So in the price range of $3,000 to $7,000, and also new product launches like Meteor and other products which are in the pipeline. So these combination of all these things should revive sustained demand in coming years. We believe that next year the company should post a volume growth of 25%, and based on historical average valuation of 33 times forward earnings, we have valued the company at 3,520 rupees. That's it from my side. So we can move to the next slide.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. It's Runjhun here. So, Eris Life Science is basically a Ahmedabad-based chronic specialist pharma company. What I mean by chronic is they are into CNS and CVS segments like diabetes and all, where it's a lifestyle diseases. So once the drug, you start taking the drug, you go on for pretty long time and sometimes for the lifetime also. So this gives quite a revenue visibility for any of the company, and that is why the chronic segment normally grows, outperforms the IPM, and there is less seasonality also. Even in this COVID, this thing, we have seen that the Eris Life Science product has not, the portfolio has not been impacted, and they have grown pretty well in the first half also. So that is, we believe that the for future also, Eris continues to outperform IPM, as the product portfolio for future is very good. Their main two segments, which is chronic and VBM, that is vitamins, minerals, and nutraceuticals, is been growing, is 75% of the portfolio and is growing very well. They're also launching Derma in FY22 next year, which is another attractive segment and one of the high growth segments in the industry. Also, one of the risk factor which is not there in Eris and which is beneficial for the company is about the regulatory risk from international agencies, as this is a purely domestic play. So the kind of news when we listen that the US FDA has come up and came up with the inspections, there's some X number of 483s have come up and the stock tanks. So this kind of risk is quite minimal in the Eris Life Science. It does have a strong balance sheet with robust cash generation abilities and debt-free status. The company has healthy working capital cycle also, which has increased slightly during the COVID season, but they are working towards bringing it down. In last, if you've seen that in the farmer rally, recent farmer rally, Eris has not performed much, and because there were earlier concerns that the kind of growth it used to enjoy earlier would not be sustainable in the future. But during last 6 months, the company has showed that it is able to sustain and likely to continue the outperformance in future also. Though the management has given a guidance of around 15% sales and EBITDA growth for next year, we believe that this is very threshold and minimal kind of growth, and management has just been conservative, and we believe that it would grow at least higher in terms of EBITDA margins. And we have valued we have given a target of around 726 for this company, and we believe it's a quality stock in pharma which we can see. The other stock what we have selected for today is Tata Consumer Products Limited, that is the erstwhile Tata Global Beverages. Sir, next slide, please.
Yeah, I'm just trying my computer.
Sure. So Tata Global Beverages, what has actually changed? It's a branded play, and it's world's number two player in tea segment and number one in India in terms of branded tea player. The things which have changed recently, one is that they have got the product portfolio from the Tata Chemicals of the consumer products, which includes the spices, pulses, salt, and this has been done under the guidance and leadership of Mr. Chandrasekhan, who has joined as the chairman level for Tata Sons also and for Tata Consumer Products also. And plus, recently, Mr. Sunil D'Souza has joined as MD and CEO level. He joined last year. He has 26 years of rich experience. Before here, he was MD of Whirlpool India, and before that, he was key management player in PepsiCo. So he has a rich experience in consumer products and consumer segment. Under this, they are targeting new innovative products. They are coming up with new products like and if you see, they have their base ready with tea and salt. So both are number one and Indian leaders in this segment. So their base is ready. What they have to do is in the new segments, which is spices and pulses, they need to perform and they need to build the portfolio in this and outgrow in that. If you see the salt business, it is around 95% is a branded business. But if you come to the pulses and spices, it is the opposite. So 95% is actually unorganized segment, and they're not much. At least in pulses, there is not any pan India branded player. So if they can leverage on this, this would be very beneficial. And we have seen that during the COVID, people are not going out. They are mostly doing ordering from e-commerce, and they trust basically the trend towards branded and the quality and the health has we have seen has been gone. And we think that this trend is likely to continue. So I was talking about the driving innovation. So they are been driving innovation, and they had trying to launch new products like the Nutrimix, that is chila, poha, chutney, organic pulses. So I think this would give them the basket of products and more awareness and more growth opportunities for the company. Uh, Tata Consumer Products is quite attractively uh, valued and present at attractive valuation as compared to other FMCG companies. The one thing which is something striking, if you see, is the ROE is quite low for this company. That is because they have a quite a big goodwill in their balance sheet because of the Tetley acquisition in the past and in the past. So that is why the ROE is optically looks lower. We believe this could be a good bet for long-term gains. And the tea prices, which was a concern till last quarter, that has been growing up after a long time, has now started correcting. So even from the near-term perspective, also we believe this is a good stock. Thank you.
Yeah, Kansha.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So one of our pick is Infosys.
Kansha, increase your
Hello.
voice.
Hello.
Yeah, now it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. So one of our pick is Infosys. Under the leadership of new CEO Salil Parekh, since Jan 2018, the company has implemented new strategies. And with this new strategies, the company's major focus was to accelerate growth, for which the company was focusing on winning larger deals, working with the existing clients, and acquiring new clients, which has started showing results. So over FY 18 to 20, deal pipeline grew at a CAGR of 71.4%. And in spite of the pandemic in Q3 FY 21, the company has reported its best ever TCV of $7,129 million, taking 9-month FY 21 TCV to around 12,000 million, which is high when we compare it to TCS. Other than this, the company has been recording a growth of around 8% in dollar terms over FY 17 to 20. Even in FY 21, the company will record a growth of around 6%. However, with higher deal wins, we feel Infosys will record a double digit growth for FY 22. Other than this, Infosys has consistently outperformed TCS in last 4 quarters on Q growth parameter. So we feel with the consistent outperformance in the growth and the deal win, the gap between the valuation of Infosys and TCS should reduce. And so we are positive on the company, and we have recommended the company with the target price of rupees 1544. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all from research team. I now request Kunal to take over from here.
Hi, I'm Kunal Shah. Generally, in budget, we don't see much announcement for commodities. There are a few announcements, so basically, I will just brief on that, and I generally share my outlook on commodities. What are the trends? What are the macro trends? And what this sector is going to do in times to come. So first of all, before I start my presentation, a major announcement this time, from last many years we have been waiting that there will be slash in gold or silver import duty, and that has finally taken place. So from 12.5%, the duty has been reduced to 10.25%, and that has led to fall in gold and silver prices in the domestic purses. But however, silver prices are continuously moving up on international market due to some developments taking place in the commodity. So major announcement, gold and silver duty reduction. Nothing much as far as the commodity market. No commodity transaction tax was lowered. There was also talks about setting up physical gold bullion exchange, bullion exchange. I think the guidelines of that is not revealed in the budget, so we'll wait for the fine prints and how they are going to go about it. No clarity has been given on that front. So let us focus on what are the trends going forward. So in commodities market, 2021 was the phenomenal year. After the stimulus package given by the Western central bankers, we've seen massive devaluation of dollar, and hence commodity prices have shot up gradually. So right now we are at that stage where all the positive news or all the positive developments, may it be China economic growth, may it be a COVID vaccine, everything is basically factored in the commodity prices. But there are few developments which we have to monitor in order to implement. What are the new catalysts which are going to drive commodity prices up? So that is what we are going to discuss. What is, when you talk about commodities, you have to also see that what is basically expected out of China's economic outlook. So in 2022, what is going to be the trend about China's economic growth and commodities outlook? So first of all, we look at the US balance sheet is expanding and likely to continue. So 80 billion worth treasuries and 40 billion worth backed mortgage backed securities are being bought by US, and US balance sheet is expanding. And going forward, whatever projections which are coming out of FOMC meeting, it seems that this balance sheet is likely to expand for next, at least conservatively, 1 year. So we don't see, or we don't expect that this quantitative easing QE is going to end anytime soon. What are the factors, where everyone is expecting the QE to continue? What is going to happen? What is going to be the major trigger? What are the catalysts which will basically stop this massive liquidity coming into the market and chasing various asset class? So everyone must be aware about what is happening in some of the. So this year we had in 2020 we had crude going down to -40. Now we see some of the gaming company stock, rising from $40, $30, $40 to $500. So this kind of massive movement taking place. So silver in last 3 days, it has moved up by 18%. No fundamental reason, nothing is coming. So the Reddit forum is indicating that they are buying silver, and suddenly there is a up move in silver, short squeeze taking place. So the massive liquidity which is chasing few assets are creating a lot of disproportion in the market. So we cannot say that commodities are going to move up and up and up and up because of this thing. So what are the major triggers? What are the things we should see which will lead to? So like I explained, US, you look at the US, Europe, Bank of Japan, Bank of Canada. So major central banks balance sheet has expanded like they are printing money like there is no tomorrow. So on an if you total stimulus given by the global central bankers, that amount comes to $17 trillion. I'm not talking about the six major central bankers. I'm talking about the global. So this kind of monetary easing we have not seen in the history of financial market. This is unreal. So the way they are printing money, like there is no tomorrow. So that's the reason why the fundamentals are not playing any major role. So if you look at the demand and supply of many commodities, and that will not justify the kind of upside what we have seen. The role of liquidity and the role, the reason, because of liquidity there is disproportion everywhere. So what is something, you know, which is basically bring everything back to sanity. So that is my next slide. That is US inflation. And when you monitor US inflation, I focus on PCE, personal consumption deflator, and that is right now at 1.45%. And so if this liquidity is continuously going to be there in the system, and this is also, if this is not able to lead to increase in PCE deflator, so if this is not moving up to 2% in next 6 months, then believe me, we are heading for a crash after 6 months. Because this kind of monetary easing, if that is also not able to create inflation, then we are definitely heading for a big problem. So after so much liquidity, if you look at this PC deflator of US, it is still at 1.45. If you see what in the month of March, it was at 1.85. So so much money being pumped in, but then too the inflation is not moving up. So like Sunilji mentioned, it is not it is like a Alice in Wonderland, where you cannot think that just because markets are moving up, everything is rosy. If the inflation doesn't come in, then there is a big problem 6 months down the line, 5 months down the line. So till then, the party may continue, but the problem which can come after that, that there is a, you know, Japanification of the US economy is taking place if the inflation is not coming. So Japan is in deflation from last 30 years, 3 decades. And Japanese government is continuously propping up the stock by buying stocks. So I think currently Japan is holding 7% of its total equity right now. So you cannot just keep printing, and if the inflation doesn't move up, then definitely there is going to be a big problem. So this is one factor you should monitor going forward in next 6 months. I'm not I can't say that whether the inflation will move up or no. It's very difficult call to take. But if inflation is not moving up, then there is a big problem. Okay, then another probability, if the inflation test 2%, then what will happen? Then the market will start pricing in that Fed will eventually taper. So no matter what, commodity for next 5 to 6 months can still, you know, stay elevated at higher levels. But the matter of fact is, after 6 months, I don't see any major upside taking place in any of these commodities. So except gold and silver, most of the commodities for next 5 to 6 months can remain in bullish trajectory. But after that, if inflation is not moving up, then too there is a problem, and commodities will start to go down, correcting. And if inflation is moving up, then the tapering fear will start to haunt the market. So this is my theme for the year 2021 is, first half looks broadly okay, second half doesn't look good to me. So if everything is priced in, what is not priced in? So in commodities, so like we saw in India's budget today, government focusing on higher spending. Everyone talking about the stimulus, but no one is talking about the infrastructure plan, which is going to come in the US in the month of February. So this bill was passed in June 2020. When Democrats had a majority in the House, at that time they were talking about $320 billion worth spending in highways and roads. So this is going to be another catalyst for commodity as an asset class. So if US starts spending $400-500 billion on the infrastructure, then I think the commodity market, the prices of commodities, especially the industrial commodities, are really going to shoot up quite sharply. So in the month of February, I'm expecting this announcement to come, and this can lead to some upside in the industrial commodities going forward. So right now, there are two consensus call which is there in the market. First, regarding dollar, everyone is expecting dollar to crash. Already dollar index is down from 103 to 99 kind of levels right now. 90 kind of levels right now. It tested 89. But everyone is expecting dollar index to stay weak or crash. So this is a consensus call. So due to any reasons, so in today China, we saw that the interbanking lending rates started to shoot up. There are concerns about the state-owned enterprises defaulting going forward, and that can lead to tighter scenarios. So this kind of movement, this kind of news, this kind of events can really lead to some risk of trade. So you have to monitor. So I'm not expecting dollar to crash immediately. Yes, it is the fundamentals of dollar is weak, but it has become a consensus trade right now. So I'm not expecting dollar to crash immediately. That is something going forward one. So now look at the China's data points, China's economic recovery. So these are the charts where it is projecting China's industrial production, exports, retail sales, imports, fixed asset investment, and GDP. So from last 2 quarters, there has been a constant up move in most of the economic indicator except the exports. Exports are still not picking up because the US and Europe market continues to remain weak because of the COVID cases. And the real GDP of GDP growth is phenomenal in China from last 2 quarters especially. So this is something which is helping commodity prices to stay at these levels. Now, if you do take the breakup of the data I showed you, the chart I showed you, these are the key drivers of commodity prices: fixed asset investment, manufacturing growth, and the industrial production growth. So there is in this mining, manufacturing, and utilities, every three. So this is the chart which clearly projecting the demand in China, where 50% of the commodities are consumed, the industrial commodities are consumed, is robust. So don't expect any crash immediately, but it clearly indicates that the China's economy is fairly doing well. The housing market, the property market is also, if you look at the sales volume in property market in China, they are also surging quite sharply. So these are very positive signs. Only retail sales is doing good, but not the online goods and services. But broadly, retail sales is doing good. So this all makes me believe that in next 2 to 3 months, whatever downside of 5 to 10% you see in base metals, I think that will be a buying opportunity for next 6 months. And we are not going to see any crash, at least in next 6 months in base metals. So coming to the main point after this, so if you look at the 2-year break-even inflation of US, 5-year, 10-year, and 30-year, in the month of June, the 2-year break-even inflation in US was at 0.9%. Right now, it is at 2.2%. So this is something, all these data are going to be very important going forward. If the inflation is moving up, then commodities too will start to remain in the upward trajectory. So next 6 months, still there is a good chance that commodities can still give you some rally also. But post that, like I expressed my concern, I'm not very optimistic post that. So still not expecting major crash. Coming to the main commodities which are traded, gold. So when I talk about gold, I've stopped talking about the retail jewelry demand of India and China. It doesn't matter anymore. Why? If you look at what is happening in the ETF market from the month of December 2018, if you see here, there is a constant rise in gold ETF holding and the central bank buying gold. So these are the key drivers of gold. So gold is no longer moving up or down because of the India and China's jewelry demand, which is down 30-40% from last 2 years. So gold, the massive buying going on in gold ETF this year, the 2020 year chart, if you see this, you'll come to know that almost 26 million ounce of gold. Historically, we've never seen such buying taking place in gold ETF. So we have to see what are the factors. So whenever till the time we see the probability of tapering is there, or inflation is really moving up sharp, I think gold still looks attractive going forward. And because in a sea of liquidity where everything is rallying, the rally in gold seems to be the most the most justification I have in all the asset classes, the rally in gold. Because when the currency is losing value, when such monetary easing is taking place, so recently gold prices have corrected because of the India's import duty cut. I think it is a good buying opportunity for somebody who has missed the bull run of gold. I'm not talking about extraordinary returns, but still it will be able to deliver 10 to 15% CAGR return, at least for next 1 or maximum for 2 years. So I'm of the view that these levels 48,000 are good levels to go long in gold, and eventually you will see at least 10 to 15% appreciation in gold. Now coming to the most sensitive commodity, silver. So like I said at the start of my presentation, the stock of GameStop, basically the Reddit community uh, aggressively went long in this. There was a short squeeze, and the stock moved up from $30 to $500, and from $500 to $200. Same community has entered in silver, but at the same time, the fundamentals of silver are also strong. The silver mining supply as of 2020 stands at 8%. There is a 8% loss of production in silver because of the COVID crisis, mainly in South America. And the demand side looks very bright, mainly led by the solar demand. So stronger demand, lower supply, and the Reddit community is going long in silver. So I think looks positive broadly. I don't expect it to go below 68, 67, and it can test very well 78,000 to 80,000 rupees going forward. Right now trading around 73,000. So looks bullish for silver going forward. And mainly, if you look at the silver's ETF holding, in last so many, in fact, in 2019, the ETF holding in silver was almost 90 million ounce. This year it is 270 million ounce. So this kind of growth in silver ETF calls for the major rally in silver, and that is what we saw in 2020, and we are going to see in 2021 also. Coming to the commodity, most important commodity, oil. So now this is one commodity where I'm not bullish going forward. I'm not bullish on oil. Everyone is talking about the economies are opening up. There's going to be oil consumption is going to be back. So pre-COVID, oil consumption stood at 100 million barrels per day, and supply also stood at 100 million barrels per day. Post that, the consumption rapidly dropped to 85 million barrels per day. Right now, roughly it stands at 95 million barrels per day, and the production, basically OPEC and OPEC Plus, that includes Russia, they cut the production to the tune of 7 million barrels. Right now also there is 6 million barrels worth of crude oil which is not coming into the market, and then because of that, prices are at elevated levels. So right now crude oil market is in deficit, but this is artificial. So let us assume that the Brent crude oil prices stays at $60 average for a quarter or so. I think the oil production, all the oil producers in Middle East will break their compliance, and the oil production from the Middle East itself will shoot up. US shale oil production is also expected to shoot up by 1 to 1.5 million barrels going forward. So the Brent $60-62 maximum upside. I am not bullish in crude oil. This price spike is not real. It is basically because of the massive production cut. In my history of 15-16 years in commodity market, I have not seen production cut more than 1.5 to 2 million barrels per day. But this time it was at the start, it was 7 million barrels production cut per day. And so doesn't look good. I'm not bullish on crude oil just because the inflation is moving up, and the funds and ETFs get into oil to hedge against inflation. That is the only reason why oil prices are at here and can still go up by a couple of dollars from here. But this is one commodity where I am not at all bullish. So like I was telling you, if you see here, the components, the drop in demand in 2020 stood at 9%, but next year the demand is going to rise by 5.6 million barrels. That is in current year 2021, and I think the supply also will move up by at least 5 to 6 million barrels. So broadly, whatever demand is going to increase, supply is going to respond to it very sharply. Hence, not very bullish outlook on crude oil. So metals, these are the two metals why we remain fairly optimistic. Copper, we are bullish. Recently, there is the inventory at LME is increasing. That's why prices are down. But going forward, there is a tighter demand supply scenario in copper. 580 are kind of levels where I would recommend to go long for the upside target of 620 to 630 in copper. One metal I'm very bullish is nickel because of the electronic car battery demand. If you look here, the battery demand of nickel is right now 4% of its total demand. I'm expecting in 2021, this will be at the end of 2021, this will be 7 to 8%. So robust demand, the sale of electronic vehicles across the world is shooting up and likely to move up further. And the supply is pretty tight for nickel. So nickel, I'm expecting it to test 1400 to 1450 going forward. So nickel is one commodity where I'm very bullish from the fundamental point of view. Before I end my presentation, I would tell all the franchisees, everyone, all the clients who are there in the derivatives market and commodity market, especially, one needs to be the leverage should be controlled in such time when the Reddit and other forums are really try to rig the commodity prices. So manage your risks very carefully in commodities in recent days. Thanks a lot. I hope I added some value.